Hello beautiful people, I'm Sharina. Thank you for joining me today. Today I have with me the Bridgerton 1 collection with Pat McGrath, and I'll be trying on 3 different looks with the eyeshadow palette. And this is the third look that I have tried on today. For this third look, I have used some of the eyeshadows with a wet brush to see the difference it makes to the intensity of the eyeshadow. At the end of the 3 looks, I'll come back and share with you my thoughts as to what I think about this palette, my favorite shade, and the shade that surprised me, and if this palette lived up to my expectations. For the eyeshadow palette, it's called the Diamond of the First Water, and it is made in Italy with a shelf life of 18 months. For the blush palette, it is a Glow Trio blush palette called the Love at First Blush. It is also made in Italy with an 18-month shelf life. It consists of 2 blushes, namely Cherish, Nymphet, and a highlighter called Venus Nectar. These blushes are available individually as well. So let's start with the looks. Let's see the difference it creates by using a finger application instead of a brush application. So this does amplify the shine. So now to try the Astral shade. This is the highlight of the palette. So add more. For the third look, I'm going to try to use all the colors together to see what I can come up with. And I will also wet the brush to intensify the pigment. What I notice about this color when it's used dry, it does build up quite a light wash of color. It applies evenly as well. Try slightly darker shade here. going to use a Sigma smaller brush for concentration of more of the color, as well as to wet the brush. So I'll dip it in the powder first before wetting the brush. I'll use my MAC Fix Plus. It definitely gets more concentrated and darker. Let's try it on with the Regency Blue. Using a dry brush now to just deepen up the edges around here instead. So let's try on the blushes now. One color on each side of my cheek, and then I'll combine it together and add the highlight as well. This is called Cherish. Just to dust off a little bit. It's quite a pigmented blush. Okay, now to try Nymphet. So I've dusted off my brush in between. So this is a lighter wash of colour. It is called Venus Nectar. You can see it's an orange cast to it. So it would be better if I use a lighter hand for my complexion. Just to blend it in more. To a lighter hand here. Cherish and Nymphet. Now to mix the blushes together. Just to blend it in a little bit more. Let's start with some of the swatches. Iconic Ingenue, The Art of Swoon, and Regency Blue, which is the Astral shade. Plum Regalia, Duchess Divinity, and Love Match. So these two shades are also called eye blushes, and it does feel quite smooth to the touch. The shade that surprised me the most in this palette was this shade over here, called Duchess Divinity. Why it surprised me was because it felt so creamy and it can really stretch down so far onto my arm. And I do find that the colour is very flattering and pretty, and it can be worn for quite a natural day look as well with some shimmer. As for the Plum Regalia, it is lighter than what I thought it would be compared to Pat McGrath's Mthrshp palettes, which have a deeper, richer shade, but the colour can be built up with a wet brush. Let's do a side-by-side comparison when I wet my brush. So using a brush, adding more colour onto the brush. Bring on some of the Fix Plus. Let me just add on to the side here. So we can see the intensity. It's built up quite a bit just by using it wet. So all the formulas in this palette are wet and dry formulas. So if you like to amp up the intensity, you can just use a wet brush as recommended, or a finger application. But the wet brush compared to a finger application will give an even stronger intensity. And the Regency Blue shade, which is the highlight of the palette, definitely amps up the look of the eyeshadow. Let's try this out where I'll apply some with my finger, and then to wet my finger with the spray and see whether there's any difference when I apply it. It does melt down a little bit. So these are wet and dry formulas where if you like to build up the intensity of the shade itself. My thoughts about the palette after trying it on is that after applying it on my eyes, I find that the colours definitely look more purple compared to what I thought it would be as a more taupey shade over here. Nonetheless, it's still a very pretty look, and these two shades here are the highlight of the shades in the palette for me. For this shade here, Plum Regalia, is not as deep and saturated as some of our other shades, especially in the big Mothership palettes, where the saturation of the colors are even deeper and darker. For that reason, I find this palette, the looks that it creates, a lighter wash of look compared to the deeper, richer looks that the larger Mothership palettes can give. And what I like about the palette is I can build up the shades slowly and they blend out very easily. For the shades, the Art of the Swoon and Love Match, although they are stronger shades, we don't have to put on so much intensity if we don't want to, and just use a lighter wash of color. What I like about the blush palette, if you like to try the blushes, it's a better value to buy in this set and get a highlighter compared to the individual blushes, unless you're just looking for one of the blushes. For this highlighter shade here called Venus Nectar, it's quite a deep shade, so it does show quite strongly on my skin. So I really have to blend it in quite well. In fact, it's a bit too dark for me just to try on, but it does look quite pretty. It can be used as an eyeshadow as well. As for the blushes, between the shade Cherish and Nymphet, it's nice that we have two different tones of shades here. One is a cooler pink, which has a really strong payoff, as well as Nymphet, which is a warmer coral shade. So we can use it with a lighter hand application or mix it together as well to come up with a third shade. These are my thoughts and review for this collection. Do feel free to share as well your thoughts about this palette, or if you're thinking of picking up the second palette that has just been released. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and do consider subscribing to join me for future videos. I look forward to seeing you again in my next video. Stay beautiful. Bye!